Auschwitz, with hundreds of thousands of very old and often sick residents, had more than its share of problems, because the camps were situated in a very wet and marshy area of Poland, and with sometimes dozens of people dying of infectious diseases weekly, the bodies could not be buried underground because of the danger of them poisoning the drinking water and spreading disease even further. So the camp authorities built 5 crematoriums, powered by coke, 1 in the main camp and 4 in Birkenau. The coke was brought in from the close-by Auschwitz-Monowitz industrial complex, where they made synthetic oil from coal. Coke was a byproduct. You have heard a cremation expert tell you that coke is not a good fuel because its volatile oil has been removed, and if it gets damp or wet, it will not burn. Once a furnace is fired up, it takes an average of 40 kilograms of coke and just over an hour and a half to cremate one body. Coke, when it burns, leaves about 10% of its own weight in ash. So for every body burnt, there would be around 4 kilos of coke ash left over. An emaciated human body leaves around 1 kilogram of ash, which includes the crushed bones. We know exactly how many tons of coke were delivered to Auschwitz each year because it was carefully noted down in the camp archives. So with just a little arithmetic, we can give a very good estimate of the numbers of bodies that could have been burnt with that amount of coke. Human bodies, being made up of 75% water, are not good fuel. So you can forget any wild claims you may have heard that in the camps bodies were being used to burn other bodies. It just doesn't happen. Camp records show that in 1943, for example, 641.5 tons of coke were delivered to Birkenau over an 8-month period. Because of the wet ground and inclement weather in Poland, the coke would have had to be delivered in small amounts because there were no large storage facilities near to the crematoriums. If no coke at all was used to heat any of the hundreds of barracks, if no coke was used in any of the ovens to cook food for the camp, those 641 tons would just be enough to cremate only 1 body per retort per day, or altogether 16 bodies per day. In the same year, only 31.1 tons of coke were delivered to the main camp, and that was just enough coke to cremate only 2 bodies per day. This fact alone destroys the claim that thousands of people were being cremated every day. So the next questions must be, if we pretend for a minute the Germans had succeeded in gassing thousands of people in those 5 alleged gas chambers, 1, what did they do to get rid of all the bodies? And 2, without any bone-crushing machines, how did they crush the millions of bones to ash? You have heard an eyewitness claim that many thousands of bodies were burnt daily in large, deep pits. And you have heard our cremation expert tell you it is impossible to burn bodies to ash in pits. Well, let us see what happened when we asked a pyrotechnic expert to follow their methods and burn just 4 dry telephone books in a pit. We did this demonstration because we wanted to put the eyewitness testimony to the test, something those promoting the Holocaust have never done. So we asked a pyrotechnics expert to dig a small pit and burn 3 telephone books in it, following the methods supposedly used by the Nazis for burning dead bodies. This experiment was carried out not in the marshy wetlands around Auschwitz, but in a dry, sandy Sydney park in the middle of summer. We know that telephone books are compacted dry paper and do not burn particularly well, but if you can prove that human bodies, which are made up of around 75% water, burn faster, better, or more easily than paper, please contact us. Eyewitnesses from Auschwitz report that a mixture of motor oil and methanol was poured over about 2,000 bodies in large pits. Our pit was very much smaller, and we had no methanol, so we made up a mixture of methylated spirits, kerosene and lamp oil, and poured the proportional equivalent of 300 litres over the telephone books. And at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we lit the fire. Despite the extra fuel, our books were very reluctant to burn, and after only 10 minutes, the fire slowly died down and went out. Undaunted and wanting to give the official story every possible chance, we poured some more flammable fluid over the books, this time the proportional equivalent of 1,000 litres. And this time the flames took off. Crackling and burning, we had now poured the equivalent of 1,300 litres of flammable material onto the books, something that would have been impossible to do every day in Auschwitz. They just never had that amount of fuel available. "20 minutes passed. Mr. Rosenblum had stated that in 20 minutes thousands of dead bodies had been reduced to ash. But in our experiment, the fire had not even burnt through a third of the top telephone book. You will notice in the camera close-ups that there is even sufficient space around the books for air to circulate easily. But even that was not enough to partly destroy one telephone book. You are watching the proof that burning thousands of human bodies in pits sounds very dramatic, but is practically impossible, especially if the bodies had been frozen or it was snowing or raining as it does more than half the year in Auschwitz. After 40 minutes, our fire had gone out again, and our pyrotechnics expert was able to pull the unburnt telephone books out of the pit again. We did not continue with our efforts because we believe our point had been made. The alleged gas chamber in Dachau, shown to thousands of visitors per year, is right next door to the cremation ovens. It looks like we have all been told a gas chamber should look, with shower heads and peepholes in the door, etc. It once had a small plaque in it on the floor next to the entrance, where it was written, "Built by the Americans after the war." This plaque has been replaced by a larger sign which clearly states in 5 languages, "It was never used as a gas chamber." So it's just a Hollywood horror. In Auschwitz there were 5 large crematoriums, and each, it is claimed, had its own gas chamber, inside or underground. Each building numbered from 1 to 5. These illustrations, taken from United States Air Force aerial photos, show crematoriums 2 and 3 in Auschwitz-Birkenau. They were mirror images of each other. 2 underground chambers, numbered here 12 and 14, lead off at right angles from the main buildings. The rooms numbered 12 towards the top of the picture are claimed to have been the undressing rooms. The chambers with the numbers 14 are claimed to have been the underground gas chambers that could hold up to 2,000 people at one time. In 1944, prisoners destroyed Crematorium 4 in an uprising, and 3 others were blown up by the Russians 3 months after the war ended. Despite the Russians having captured 3 intact crematoriums with their supposed gas chambers, still no photos of any gas chambers exist. In these scenes you are looking at photos and plans and the ruins of the old crematorium buildings. The gas chambers were given the names of the cremas, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Homicidal gas chambers are very difficult to design properly, and the larger they are built, the more carefully designed they must be, especially if you are trying to avoid killing friends as well as foes. A well-designed gas chamber needs to have sealed tubing for getting the poison gas into the chamber. Windows are obviously useless and easily smashed. All necessary doors must be well sealed and lockable. And after the gassing, the hundreds of cubic meters of poisonous gas must be extracted from the chamber in a way that will not kill everyone in the vicinity. Of the 5 alleged homicidal gas chambers in Auschwitz, not one of them fulfilled any of these criteria. You have seen how the Germans took extreme care to build safe fumigation chambers for saving lives. These alleged homicidal gas chambers, where supposedly millions of people were killed, were silly Mickey Mouse constructions that were more dangerous to bystanders than to the condemned. None of the alleged chambers had heating systems to bring the Cyclone B crystals up to the 26 degrees necessary to give off the gas. None of them had gas extraction systems, and none of them show the telltale blue stains typical of Cyclone B poison. Cremas 4 and 5 were single-storied buildings and totally unsuitable as gas chambers, with 14 rooms apiece, with some rooms having 4 unsealed doors. The alleged gas chambers in Cremas 2 and 3 were supposedly underground. You have heard an eyewitness tell you how SS men got up on chairs and threw the Cyclone B crystals through windows in the roof down onto the people below. When it was blown up, the roof of Crema 2 collapsed down like a blanket, almost unbroken. We searched the roof area of Crema 2 from above and below, and nowhere could we find any holes. So with no holes, there was no way they could have gotten the poison crystals into the chamber. And that probably explains why there were also no blue stains from Cyclone B. These rooms are perfect for what they were built for, as morgues, but are useless and dangerous as gas chambers. You are probably wondering about the holes we used to climb down through. Close inspection shows these holes were crudely smashed through the roof, and the steel reinforcing rods bent back. Hardly German engineering. In this photo, taken under Crema 2, Dr. Tobin is kneeling next to a solid concrete support pillar. Some ex-prisoners have claimed the Cyclone B was tipped down the hollow support columns. Looking along the collapsed roof under Crema 2, and we see no blue staining that should have been there had Cyclone B been used here. The only chamber still undestroyed is in the Auschwitz main camp, but it too is a comedy of errors. Whereas the prisoners had a swimming pool next to their barracks, the Germans supposedly built this gas chamber only 20 paces from their SS restaurant and hospital. According to the Polish tour guides, The only method of getting the poisonous gas out of this large chamber was to open two flimsy, unsealed doors and let the wind blow hundreds of cubic meters of poisonous gas out onto the street. The only evidence we could find on the inside of the chamber was evidence of incompetence. The roof holes have, once again, been crudely smashed through the concrete. Fixtures that probably belonged to toilets have been removed, but proving this alleged gas chamber once had a toilet. And then there is the door, of flimsy wooden construction with a window, and the locking device on the inside, a door that could easily be kicked out. The tinge of blue you may see here comes from the flashed photos and not from any staining from Cyclone B on the walls, because there isn't any. Back up on the roof, Dr. Tobin points out the crematorium chimney, a chimney that is not found on any Allied aerial photos at the time, but we believe it was added later by the Russians. But whoever added it did not bother even attaching it to the building. Across the roof, Dr. Tobin points out how ludicrous it is to imagine an SS man standing up on this roof in a strong wind, trying to hold the poison-soaked roof cover in one hand, and with the other hand trying to pour highly poisonous crystals down into these holes without getting powder all over himself, and have it blown all over the rest of the camp as well, especially with his own barracks just over the road. And we can only wonder in amazement at what the camp commandant did on those days when the wind was blowing in his direction, because his own house is on the same street and less than 60 meters from this chamber. Although it is still presented to the public as a gas chamber, who was naive enough to believe that German engineers, who were already developing rockets capable of space travel, designed this? If Auschwitz were not presented as a house of horrors, tourists would stay away in droves. So when you take a tour of the camps, you are shown Soviet war propaganda films, and the guides try and outdo each other in horror stories. Go alone, and you will find the swimming pool, for example, which is on Birch Alley, behind blocks 6 and 7 in Auschwitz main camp. On summer weekends, the prisoners even held international swimming races here. The tour guides will not point out the camp post office, which offered twice-weekly pickups and deliveries. The sign is badly weathered now. It used to say Häftlings Paketstube, or Prisoner's Packet Post. Nobody will mention the first building on the left in the camp entrance, which held the camp library on the bottom floor. Upstairs in the same building, 10 women ran a brothel for the prisoners. The camp authorities admit it was the brothel, but claimed it was used more by the SS guards. Everybody knows by now that even the influential industrialist Oskar Schindler was jailed for kissing a young Jewish woman in a friendly manner. Having sex with non-Aryans, and especially Jews, resulted in very harsh punishment. So you can be absolutely certain the SS guards would have stringently avoided this facility. This is a theatre in the main camp where shows were put on and where some of the camp's many orchestras practiced, and children attended day art classes. But because that's not a gruesome enough story, the official guidebook will try and tell you that this building was used to store Cyclone B canisters and articles stolen from prisoners. However, photos exist that prove our claim. Guides will avoid pointing out to you the camp hospital, where the German side reads Intensive Care Station. According to the Sydney Jewish News, Jewish doctors like Hadassah Rosensaft and dentists like Benjamin Jacobs worked here in the infirmary, saving the lives of hundreds of sick Jewish prisoners. Across in Birkenau, no tour guide will point out where the prisoners' football field was. In this scene, it is the empty field in the background of the ruins. Prisoners in the camps often organize team sports events, as shown in this football draw. And after you've been shown piles and piles of clothing and shoes in the museum, which are no proof of mass murder anyway, because everyone knows inmates were issued prison uniforms, not one guide will point out to you that many exhibits are sitting on a false floor, which gives a false impression of how many articles exist. Guides will point out the kitchens, but they will forget to mention the kitchens had a diet section. These photos show women who have obviously been badly treated and are terrified of being inducted into a Nazi concentration camp. Next, we see the courtroom in the main camp, where judges were brought in from Krakow to try cases. If the Nazis were just arbitrarily murdering people by the thousands just for being Jewish, what crime warranted a trial? Up until recently, this plaque claimed 4 million had been murdered. The death toll is now claimed to be 1.5 million. But surprisingly, the 6 million number has not been reduced accordingly. Why not? During the war, Auschwitz had its own fairly large photographic studio and darkrooms, run by 2 German guards and staffed by 10 to 12 prisoners. Many of the hundreds of thousands of photos taken now adorn the walls of the barracks. We want to show you how camp life looked on photos, as opposed to how some prisoners depicted in artwork the way they wanted it to be seen. These drawings, for example, show groups of starving, broken inmates, and the artist calls them waiting to die. Then we have the photos of healthy, well-fed prisoners, adults and children, not taken as propaganda by the Germans, but taken by the Russians after they had captured the camp. This photo shows the daily delivery of meals as a very placid event, but the artist turned it into a fight for survival. In this drawing, prisoners are being led out on a work detail in the middle of winter. No shoes, no hats, coats or gloves. However, photos also taken on winter work details show the prisoners had greatcoats, hats, earmuffs, gloves and boots, and they do not appear to be under any duress. Another favourite theme of the artists are the beatings, bashings and murders supposedly perpetrated by vicious guards. But although hundreds of thousands of photographs were saved from destruction by the inmates at war's end, we could not find any photographs that showed prisoners were being mishandled. So we can only conclude the artists have used what is known as artistic license. In these photographs, we could only see 1 or 2 guards, if any at all. One civilian organization which played a major role in the concentration camps during the war was the International Red Cross. It is not a well-known fact, but throughout the Second World War the International Red Cross had observers stationed in German concentration camps, and at the insistence of Adolf Hitler and the German High Command, they often sent group delegations in to inspect the conditions in the camps. Seen here on an inspection tour of a camp hospital and kitchens, these delegations reported quite openly that they had seen well-run hospitals, the food was good, they had seen post offices, banks and schools, but they had not seen any gas chambers in any camp during or after the war. As late as January 1989, a representative of the International Red Cross confirmed their wartime presence in the camps, as well as their findings about the camps. This confirmation was given during testimony at a civil trial in Canada. It was also put in writing. You are looking at a photocopy of this letter. Suddenly, in 1997, the Red Cross has apologized to Israel for keeping quiet during the Holocaust, and now claims the Nazis had cleaned up the camps in readiness for their visits and had built the banks, post offices and schools to fool them. This article, taken from the Sydney Jewish newspaper, keeps quiet about what the Red Cross has been keeping quiet about. But obviously no amount of expense was too much for the Nazis when it came to fooling the Red Cross on a very large scale, because in many camps the prisoners had large soccer fields and arranged football leagues, and the Jews even conspired with the Nazis by printing their own money and making their own coins for the shops and the banks. But as the International Red Cross was created by the Rothschilds family, it's hardly surprising they've changed their tune.
After editing this tape, two minor points need to be corrected. One, although some fumigation units in Auschwitz use Zyklon B gas, the delousing units in the so-called sauna use steam, and not hot air to fumigate clothing, bedding, and so on. And two, the number of bodies cremated in Birkenau was 16 bodies per retort per crematorium. Before I answer the only question still open, let me recall some of the most important points in this film. 1. Despite politically correct opinion, Hitler did not start the war. Nor did he declare war. War was forced on him, firstly by the international Zionists, followed by Great Britain and France. 2. Hitler's final solution, or Endlösung, was a mutual contract signed with the Zionists to deport Jews to Madagascar. Another agreement, known as the Havara Agreement, was knowingly sabotaged by the international Zionists, who wanted lots of Jewish war victims so as to gain Palestine. 3. None of the concentration camps had gas chambers. Those alleged gas chambers shown to tourists in Auschwitz were mortuaries and technically useless for anything else. As well, there was never enough coke or fuel in Auschwitz to cremate more than 16 bodies per crematorium retort per day. According to Jewish authors Deborah Dwork and Robert Jan van Pelt in their book Auschwitz from 1270 to the Present, published in 1996, the alleged gas chambers at Auschwitz in the main camp known as Kremmer 1 presented to tourists as an authentic gas chamber for over 40 years is nothing but a fraud. 4. Although many prisoners unfortunately died as a result of disease, the German military machine did what it could to keep prisoners healthy by providing fumigation units and hospitals, and in many cases more food than the German population was getting, except during the last few months of the war when, owing to the extreme Allied bombing campaigns, supply had collapsed. Seen statistically, more prisoners survived the war in concentration camps than Germans survived the firebombing holocaust of German cities such as Dresden, Hamburg and Pforzheim. So the only question still left open is this: what happened to the alleged 6 million dead? Many hundred thousands of Jews emigrated from Europe before the war. Approximately 250,000 died as a result of old age, malnourishment and disease in the camps and ghettos. A Jewish military brigade group was formed during the war, and at least 1 million Jews fought in uniform, and many fell in action. Other Jews, pretending to be civilians but murdering from ambushes, died as partisans. Thousands of Jewish communities in Poland, Russia, Hungary, Romania and Czechoslovakia were destroyed by their own anti-Jewish groups and not by Germans. On the 17th of November 1941, Stalin actually sent out order number 024, repeat, number 0428, ordering special murder squads to dress in German uniforms and slaughter civilians behind German lines, always leaving a few survivors that could blame the murders on the Germans. Many Jews continued to live unmolested in Germany and occupied territory, and many of them were killed as a result of the Allied bombing raids. One day before Germany surrendered, British bombers attacked and sank in Lübeck Bay the Kap Arkona and the Thielbeck, killing 8,000 Jewish patients from Neuengamme and Bergen-Belsen camps, as well as many German medical staff. After the war, many thousands of Jews liberated from concentration camps in the East were immediately enslaved as laborers by the Russians. Interestingly, as Jewish populations in Europe dropped dramatically, they rose just as dramatically in other countries, such as Israel, the United States, South Africa, and South America, as well as Australia. Many more Jews decided they had had enough of being Jewish, and they changed their names and religion.
The British started bombing German cities months before Germany retaliated, and more bombs were dropped on Berlin in one day than the Germans dropped on Great Britain throughout the whole war. This man, Bomber Harris, was responsible for burning alive hundreds of thousands of innocent women and children, and the British built memorials to him. This man, Rudolf Hess, flew to Scotland in 1941 in a last-ditch effort to make peace with the Allies. He was pronounced to be mad, was sentenced to life imprisonment, and over 40 years later, just before his release, British agents strangled him to death in Spandau prison. His memorial was destroyed. So, who really wanted war?
The sun on the meadow is summery.